Hey, everyone. Welcome to the latest podcast episode. This is your host, Terry Knight. I'm very excited to talk to this man, Nick Hutchison. And let me tell you, he's coming out with a book in November. This man has a seven-figure digital marketing agency that serves driven authors. And this man has interviewed business celebrities like, Grant Cardone, Lewis Howes, Patrick Pitt, Bet David, and Alex Hormozi, and countless others. But man, he's blowing up. Check him out. I'm really excited to have you on, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, hey, thank you for the opportunity. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, what's up?
What is your favorite book of all time?
Think and Grow Rich so far, but I think that's like a classic that everyone kind of
Yeah,
steers
that
to.
counts though. One of my favorite quotes is from Think and Grow Rich. It's action is the real measure of intelligence, which is what my book is all about, taking action on the books we read. And check this out. I remember the first time I read Think and Grow Rich, I had over 100 takeaways from the book. But that's not realistic action, right? So that's something that maybe we could touch on a little bit later in the conversation. But I figured I might start asking podcast hosts like what their favorite book is right off the bat, and I'm happy that I did because that's a really good book.
Yeah, definitely, man. Look, Nick, I think what you're doing is great, man. Your book's going to help a lot of people because I feel like even for me, I'm gonna be honest, I don't read as many books as I should, but when I do, I don't implement the strategies that they talk about. Maybe because I'm
Well, we can
overwhelmed
fix
and
both of those things.
hey, that's a good start, man. But we'll get down to that in a little bit. But first and foremost, man, Nick, let people know who you are, where you're from. Let's go from there.
I'm 29 years young. I'm in the Boston, Massachusetts area, born and raised, bounced around quite a bit. A little bit of a digital nomad for a period of time, lived in 25 different countries, sometimes for up to 3 months at a time. And I love personal development books. I believe in the power of personal development. I believe that the right book at the right time can change your life. And I'll kind of kick off here. You know what? Although we're going to be talking a lot about books today, when I was growing up, I was not a reader at all. In fact, I was more of the athlete stereotype, not much of the academic. Like you probably couldn't have paid me to do my homework. But all of that changed when I was going into my senior year of college. I went to business school. Again, wasn't a great student, spent more time playing basketball and in the gym than anything else. But I took this internship going in my senior year of college, and my boss at the time introduced me to podcasting. And so I had about an hour commute each way to this internship 5 days a week that summer. And so I started just crushing podcasts like this, where somebody would interview a series of guests and they would talk about what they did to become successful. And what I realized was that so many of those people gave at least some credit for their success to the books that they were reading. And so that's kind of how I was convinced to read because I wanted to be financially successful at that time. That's what I was focused on. And I realized that books condense decades of wisdom into days of consumption. And I was like, that's something that I want. So I just wanted to share that at the beginning because if somebody's listening today and they're like, oh, I'm not much of a reader, like, I don't know if I should be listening to this. Like, let me convince you, let me show you why it helped me build this seven-figure business.
Yeah, man, hands down. What was your first steers of, or your first books you read when you kind of had a deep dive in?
Yeah, so I'm listening to these shows and the same names keep popping up over and over and over again. So I kind of made like a little list and I had a couple of books on it. And I went to my local Barnes and Noble bookstore and all the books that I wanted were there and I found some more as well. So the first book that I decided to read was Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. Have you read that one?
Uh, Not all of it, a couple chapters. Again, I need to improve myself to finish a book, but
Hey, that's
it's
what
a
we're
good one.
here to talk about today. So the reason that I started with that book is because I was a business student that didn't know anything about money. And as a business student, you're around a lot of kids talking about how much money they're going to make after school and talking about all these complex investing strategies and stuff like that. And I would shy away from those conversations because I didn't have the language. Like I didn't know what they were talking about. And so I I read that book and a few other books on personal finance and investing. I went back to school my senior year and I was leading those conversations. So I turned like this insecurity and this fear into something that I actually enjoyed talking about. And it didn't take that long, right? It just took a few books and it just took a few hours of my time, like, you know, $100 or whatever. And so that was that was the thing for me, was like, what other areas of my life can I improve? And I had this kind of OG of personal development on my podcast. His name's
Hmm.
Brian Tracy. And Brian told me, he's like, if you read 3 books on a subject, you know more than 95% of the world does on that subject. And I'm like, and that's how it works, right? So what other areas of my life could I read about? Fitness, nutrition, mindset, anything. It's all available to us, which I think is so cool.
Yeah, the first step is like you said, is trying to read, right? And get that knowledge. But that's a good point, man. So you transitioned to reading, you started leading based off that. What made you build Book Thinkers? Like how did that step phase come about?
Well, I was always a little bit rebellious, like in school and stuff growing up. I always thought maybe one day I'd start a business. In fact, earlier in my college experience, I worked for this company that helped you start your own house painting business. And so I ran my own house painting business for 2 summers, and I was terrible at it. Like out of every student that ran their own house painting business, I was kind of at the bottom. But I learned so much, right? I had to go home on weekends and do door-to-door selling. I had to hire my friends to paint these houses and get them trained. I had to manage the job sites, collect the checks. As like a 19, 20-year-old kid, it was super stressful, but I learned a ton. I decided that I needed some external experience, which is why I took that internship going into my senior year, like working for somebody else. And right away, I was like, listen, I'm not going to be a great employee. I might be a high performer, but I'm not a good employee. Waiting to make decisions for 3 months and attending meetings that are pointless and all that kind of stuff. So my friend Alec and he had also run his own house painting business. He was a lot better than me at that. We would meet my senior year on weekends in those like kind of college classrooms that had the whiteboards and that sort of stuff. And we would just map out like business ideas. And we had a couple that we didn't really take action on. But one day I walked in and I was like, hey, listen, I'm reading all these books on entrepreneurship and personal development and personal finance. And, you know, like businesses are supposed to solve problems. And I said, I have this really little problem, but I can't find a way to solve it. And that's that everybody's asking me the same questions about the books I'm reading. And I want to find a place to categorize like all my favorite takeaways from these books. So if somebody says, hey, what'd you think of Think and Grow Rich? I could just send them to, I don't know, like this website, or what is it going to be? So that's how I started Book Thinkers, was that I was tired of answering all the same questions about these books. And once I graduated, we formed a legal business. We knew that's what business owners did. And we actually tried to build a mobile application that could help readers retain and implement more from the books they're reading, and it failed. So, kind of long story short, there, we spent tens of thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours of our time, and it failed. But in anticipation of releasing it, I knew that we wanted to sell it into an audience. So, I started to build a social media audience, just reviewing the books that I was reading. And when the business like mobile app failed, the social media audience started to take off. And so that's kind of like the origin story for the business. Hopefully that wasn't too boring for everybody, but yeah, it taught me that like sometimes your original idea for a business is not going to work out, and it will take longer than you think. I mean, I had that blissful ignorance, like I'm going to go make $1 million in the first year, and didn't work that way.
Yeah, Nick, good call on that, because I think a lot of people don't realize your first idea or your first accomplishment of starting something may not go as planned. You pivoted to social media and that worked out very well. So it just kind of shows not to give up. Like keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, the road to success and the road to failure are the same road. You just might have to pivot a little bit every once in a while. You have to overcome a few obstacles. But if you persevere long enough, continue to take feedback and iterate as you're going, I think everybody can get there. People just give up too soon. Like, I love that concept that you're always 3 feet from gold. And if you turn around, you just miss that jackpot. So, uh, as I continued just to post about the books I was reading, authors started to reach out to me and they'd say, hey, Nick, like, I just put out this book. I think it'd be a great fit for our audience. Can I pay you for a book review? And I'm like, yeah, like I'm reading for free, working. I took a full-time job with that software company out of school. So I'm working a full-time job. I'm reading for free. I want to be in the space one day. Now I can learn from these authors, like get to know them a little bit. And that was kind of the first successful form of monetization. I will say BookThinkers failed financially for 5 straight years. And one of the, yeah, it's a long time, maybe 4 straight years. So one of the early pieces of advice that I got from a mentor of mine was don't jump too soon. He said 95% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years because
Mhm.
they run out of money. And he said, Nick, you don't have an emergency fund. Like if you just jump into this business idea and leave your full-time job behind, you're going to run out of money. You're going to burn out. You're going to go back to the job and you're going to give up on entrepreneurship. So he said, slow and steady wins the race. Like no matter how many times you read Aesop's fable, The Tortoise and the Hare, the tortoise always wins every time. It's kind of a funny way to think about it, but that lesson has been true for a very long time. And so I actually kept, this is what gets kind of crazy for some people. Maybe it's not that crazy, but I kept my full-time job
Mhm.
past the point that I hired my first few employees. BookThinkers did over 6 figures in revenue, and I still had my full-time job. So that's how much I wanted to mitigate risk and how much I wanted to kind of like make sure that this thing was successful before I jumped.
Yeah, man, hands down. Cool story that you brought up. Book thinkers failed financially for 5 years. What helped you kind of get over that huddle for such? It's a long time, but you got to have that mindset, right? But how did that help you out?
Yeah, I think that I was connected to a purpose. So in my full-time software sales job, I read a bunch of sales and marketing books, and I was able to kind of go from entry-level business development intern all the way up to sales director, leading a team of people within a few years, making 6 figures as an employee in my early 20s right out the gate. And I did that by reading these books, but I also solved a lot of other issues in my life. I overcame some ego related issues that I had, a lot of insecurities, a lot of fears, and I started to build a more fulfilling life. And I realized like life doesn't have to be so hard if you can read the right books and implement them.
Mhm.
And so I was connected to a purpose. Like I believed that the right book at the right time could change my life. The software job that I had at the time, and I love that company, but it didn't feel like I was connected to a purpose. I was selling transportation management software. Like that didn't light me up. But the book stuff lit me up. So I was working a 9 to 5, let's call it 8 hours. And then I had this 5 to 9 that brought me more energy in a shorter period of time, like my side hustle. So I think every time Book Thinkers failed, I was just reminded, like somebody would send me a DM and be like, "Hey, I just read this book recommendation that you gave and it changed my life." Like that happened, that started to happen very consistently. So it was like, I have to figure this out. Like the financial thing, what you learn when you read a lot of books on entrepreneurship is most business owners fail for a long time first. And so I just realized that was part of the process. Like I came to expect it. So it didn't surprise me when things didn't work out the way that I wanted them to.
Cool, man. I'm glad that you got over that huddle. But how? When did you decide to go full time into Book Thinkers? You got some employees, 6 figure revenue. When was that jump for you, and how was that like?
There's I'll try to be brief with the story, but I had there had been multiple times that I wanted to jump. The first time I called my boss at the software company. The software company had been acquired twice. And what the strategy for me was, instead of raising my hand during that transition, like the acquisition period, and saying, let me take on more responsibility, I was like, I know I'm going to leave this job eventually. So let me just kind of like try to hide a little bit, not jump up the corporate ladder and just kind of like be forgotten about. And during one of these acquisitions, I was on a call with like the new owner of this business. And all of a sudden, cumulatively, like now this software company has hundreds of employees together between the companies and stuff. So like I was starting to fall into tears, which was nice, and I could kind of go unnoticed. But I had a call with the CEO of this whole thing, and I said, "Hey man, I think it's time for me to kind of hang him up." And it's time for me to go full time into my business. And he said, no. He said, why don't we just reduce your responsibilities down to a few hours a week? You can keep your salary and everything like that. Go try your hand at BookThinkers, and if it fails, you can transition right back into the business. I just need you to keep like a small book of business and do your part. Like, don't ignore any potential customers, because I was making them some money, you know what I mean? And they wanted to keep me around. So I actually was able to lower my like weekly input to 5 to 10 hours a week while I focused on BookThinkers full time. And it stayed that way for 2 years. So 2 years I was able to operate like that. So it's a little bit of a unique story. But again, if you provide enough value, you can kind of bend the rules, right? You can control your own reality. And that's what I was doing. I was providing enough value. So 2 years into that, BookThinkers is, I have a few employees. We're doing 6 figures in revenue. Um, and I just had another one of those moments. Like, I think this is time to jump. Like, I could sustain this really cool job for a very low amount of time, but I was being interviewed on shows and they'd ask me about entrepreneurship. And meanwhile, I have a full-time job, right? So like full-time job. So it created just some like insecurities and stuff for me. And I was like, you know what? Like, what's the worst case scenario? I can always go back. But like, if I make the full-time jump, that'll get me really serious about this business. So I made that full-time jump after visiting Stephen Pressfield. He's an author, and Lewis Howes in the same day. The two really like high performance, big business, millions of book authors. And I just had such a great experience with both of them. It was a day where we were filming pods at both of their offices and houses. And I was like, man, I just want to be doing this full time and never have to think about transportation management technology again. So that day I decided to make the jump, and yeah, it was definitely worth it.
Wow, man, that's an amazing story. When you had those interviews, those pods with Lewis Howes and the other individual, like, how was that like? Just sitting there listening and just taking it all in and kind of going through your life and saying, well, dang, I could do the same thing. Why can't I do it?
Yeah. You know, that day that I decided to officially go full time with BookThinkers, the first interview we had that morning was with Stephen Pressfield. Stephen Pressfield is 80 years old, and he didn't see any success until his 50s. But now, you know, he's been on Rogan a bunch of times and every other top, Tim Ferriss' show, like all the top personal development type podcasts. And I was listening to Pressfield tell his story. He basically said that he's always trusted in like omens, like signs, whatever you want to call it, stuff like that. You see a penny on the ground and its heads up, it's going to be the best day ever, like that type of thing. And he always took chances. Like, he'd work for no money just to get a little bit closer to his dream. And he put 30 years of work in before he saw any success. But then he wrote the book, The Legend of Bagger Vance, which got turned into a movie, and Matt Damon and Will Smith acted it, right? And then he writes The War of Art, which sells millions of copies. And now he's interviewed on all of the world's top podcasts, and he's famous, but he's old. And so I was thinking, like, I was watching him talk about it, and I was thinking, like, how can I accelerate my own journey? Because I do understand delaying gratification and putting in the work and being patient, but I also want to condense that timeline. And I was like, I just have to make some radical decisions here. And it wasn't even that radical. Like, my business was already successful and could have, instead of taking an income from it, I was essentially reinvesting back into the business at the time. I was like, I think I could just start to take a little bit of an income from this business. And then I hung out with Lewis Howes. Lewis Howes is just one of the coolest guys ever. Like, he genuinely cares about people. He has a huge team. I think he has like 50 people on his team. He hosts these world-class events, makes millions of dollars a year just from YouTube ad rev from his podcast. And he gave us like 5 hours. Like, we recorded with him for an hour, but we also just hung out with him for like 4 or 5 hours outside of that too. And he broke down my business and made a bunch of recommendations. And again, it was just this, it was me looking at him and his business and saying, I could do this. It doesn't seem that hard. And so it just gave me the confidence. But as I was being interviewed on other people's podcasts, and every time they'd ask me about entrepreneurship, it was also just a reminder that, like, this is how other people perceive me, but I don't perceive myself this way just yet. So I need to make the jump.
Gotcha. No, man, makes sense. I'm glad you're able to do both those podcasts, very meaningful. And I think that made you change and pivot quickly as well. So what happened after that? You did those two podcasts, like, okay, great. I'm going full time to Book Thinkers. What were you doing after that? Just
Yeah.
interviewing more
So
people on podcasts or what?
that night I was walking around with my ops guy who was already on the BookThinkers team. And I was talking about both interviews. And we looked down and there was a penny heads up on the ground. I still have that penny today. And what's funny is we were on our third lap around this same area. And I was like, you know what, man? Like, I know I need to make a full-time jump. Like, I need a sign. And it sounds kind of funny, but the penny was right there and it was heads up. And I was like, that's the sign. Like, I don't know where this just came from. We've already walked around here a few times. Like, obviously, we didn't see it the first couple of times, but that's the sign that I need. So I call up my full-time job. I jump. And dude, the first month that I was full-time in BookThinkers, our revenue doubled. And it wasn't doubling my input to the business. Remember, I was only working like 5 hours a week at this other job, but it was like this universal sign, hey, you're headed in the right direction. And that was really cool. And since then, it's the business has continued to grow. We've hosted our first event. We've collabed with all of the coolest people on the planet. And I'm happy as can be, man. I enjoy the passage of time. And, like you mentioned in the intro, I have this book, Rise of the Reader, coming out November. And yeah, I'm in love with this business and this mission and this life that I have and all of it.
Cool, man. Yeah, let's deep dive into this book you got coming out here in November. I think it's probably the best unique strategy in my opinion, because again, you have to read a book and implement it. That's how you improve your life, right? And so forth. But let's deep dive in as far as how your book can actually help that for people struggling like myself and just others.
Yeah, there are so many different things that I detail in this book, from scheduling reading time to setting an intention for each book, effective reading and note-taking strategies, how to take better action, form accountability, track your activity, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So we could touch on a few things. So whenever I meet somebody that tells me that they're not a reader or that they can't read, I love to say, if I paid you $10,000 to read a book by the end of the month, do you think you could do it? And everybody's like, heck, I could read five, you know what I mean? And so it's not a question, and they fall into my trap, right? Because that proves that it's not a question of whether or not you can read. It's a question of whether or not you value it enough to prioritize it in your calendar. So would you read without the $10,000? I'll give you a quick story. Last year, I read $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozi. Excellent book. I spent $20 on it, a few hours of my time. Within a handful of months, I generated an additional 6 figures of revenue for my business just by changing the way that I offered my services. So talk about ROI. I read a $20 book that made me over $100,000 in a couple of months. So should you value these books? Yes, absolutely you should. They can make you money. They can solve problems. They can develop skill sets. Let's say that you're like, okay, I want to start reading a little bit more. Check out the following math. And this is what I'd recommend for you, Terry. So if you read for 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening, that's 30 minutes a day. If you're just starting out, 30 minutes of reading is about 20 pages. You do that 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, that's 100 pages a week. Most of these books, they're only 200 pages on average these days. So that's a book every 2 weeks. That's 26 books over the course of the next year by replacing a little bit of social media in the morning and a little bit of Netflix in the evening. Not the whole thing. Like, I'm not a robot. I watch Netflix or HBO or football or whatever. But I'm just saying, 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the evening is 26 books a year. That's 26 different problems you can solve. That's 26 different skills you can develop, mindsets that you can adopt. And here's the funny thing. Social media, Netflix, it's not going to change your life, but the right personal development book might. And so I always like to kind of joke that I can't even remember the main characters' names in shows I watched like 3 months ago that I loved. That proves how much of a waste of time it is. Still watch, but just replace the first 15 minutes or the last 15 minutes with reading a good book. Watch how your future self is going to thank you.
Yeah, I took notes on that one. 15 minutes during the day in the morning, 15 minutes at night. Very doable, I think, if you have your mind set to it and you actually do it, right? So that's the first part, right? Having dedicated time for that. What would you recommend
Yes.
after that?
Well, and I want to add an additional piece of context, not to make this like too serious, but this is genuinely how I think about this. There's a great book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And death is a little bit of a weird subject, I think, but kind of hear me out, everybody. So this woman, Bronnie Ware, who wrote the book, she was an end of life, couple of months, maybe month, weeks, days with somebody as they transitioned out of this lifetime and died. And she spent a lot of time talking with these people, and she realized that most people end up living a life of regret, and they have a handful of regrets. And there were kind of 5 common themes. So the number one regret is that people lived a life based on other people's expectations of them instead of their own like unique desires, right? So conforming to society, doing the standard 9 to 5 thing, never taking action on that dream that they had because they had fear of rejection, like whatever it is. And so when I think about that, like I know life is finite. I'm 29 years old. Like I know I'm almost halfway there based on the average life expectancy in the US. It's a scary thought, but it forces me to take action. If I know that these books condense decades of somebody else's lived experience into days, and you can read about the wealthiest people, the healthiest people, the happiest people, and you can learn what they figured out in their life for $20 and a few hours of my time, why wouldn't I take that up? I don't want to live a life of regret. I don't want to think, man, you know what? I wish I did more. Because at that point, you can't do anything to change it. So I wanted to layer that in here because reading for me is about like enjoying my life, making money, being healthy, being happy, having great relationships. That's why I read these books because they solve problems and they build skill sets. And the last thing I'll say here too is like if you have a problem that you're dealing with on a daily basis, something that bugs you, financial scarcity, something in your health, something in your relationships, and you choose not to address it, over the next 30 years, it's going to come up 11,000 times if it pops up once a day. So why not spend $20 and a few hours of your time reading about how somebody else overcame that problem, fix it in the next 100 days, so that the next 10,900 days you don't have to deal with it. Like that's how I think about these books. We all think our problems are unique to us, but the fact is about 100 billion people have lived before us. Millions of them have written books, and thousands of those books detail how somebody else overcame the same problem that you're dealing with. It's all available. It's accessible. You can be a victim, or you could be a hero and go out and fix it. Okay, so now that I'm done with that rant, what do you do next? And again, I detail all these strategies and much more in the book Rise of the Reader. So make sure if you're interested in this, you grab a copy. And I appreciate your support, Terry.
Yeah, hands down.
The next kind of step in the process, I think, is like once you determine that these books have value, that they solve problems and develop skills and everything in between, and you start to schedule reading time in your calendar, how do you pick the right book? I think you should kind of sit back and analyze your life. Like, there's really kind of 2 questions to start with. Number one is there a pain that you deal with on a daily basis? And if so, go find a book that will help you solve that problem. The other side of the spectrum is if there's a difference between, okay, think about it this way. Where do you want to be in the next couple of years? Healthier, happier, wealthier? Like, what is it? And then what's the difference between that person and you? Like, what skills do they lack? What mindsets do they need to adopt? And then go out and read a book about that. So those are kind of the first two places to start. And then set a goal for each book that you read. And I promise I'll quit rambling after this. Um, Sometimes I'll meet people at conferences or even social media, and I'll ask them like, "Hey, what are you reading?" And they'll tell me, and I'll say, "Why?" And they'll be like, "What do you mean, why?" I'm like, "Why are you reading the book that you're reading? Like, what goals do you have with the book?" And they'll just be like, I don't know. I'm reading it because somebody recommended it, or I saw it on your Instagram or something like that." So what I like to do is I like to set a SMART goal for each book that I read. I call it an intention. SMART is an acronym that means specific, measurable, attainable, meaning like a realistic goal, relevant, meaning you're emotionally connected to it, and time bound. So again, SMART is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound. So instead of just reading a book on, let's say I'm reading a book on lead generation for my business, like how to go get more leads. I'm not just going to read it and hope that it changes my life. I'm going to set a goal, something like find and implement at least 2 lead generation strategies for my business by the end of October. Now, as I'm reading the book, I know whether or not it's going to help me because I'm going to find those 2 lead generation strategies and implement them into my business. I know whether or not that happened and if the book like helped me achieve that goal by the end of the time that I'm done reading it. And to take it even one step further, I write that goal on the inside cover of the book so that each time I read a few more pages, I review that intention and then my brain is filtering for those actions to take. So that's a big part of my book. You need to set an intention for each book that you choose to read so that the book can help you fulfill your goals.
Well said, Nick. And you're not rambling on, man. Like I'm learning. Like it's funny because my next question was going to be like, why do you think people do not take action after reading a book? Like, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think a couple of things are happening. Number one, they're not intentional. They don't have a goal to take action. I think you need to set that goal to take action. Remember the quote that I kind of led off today's interview with because you mentioned Think and Grow Rich. Napoleon Hill says, action is the real measure of intelligence. You don't get smarter by reading a book. You get smarter by taking action on what you've read and implementing it into your life. So if your goal from the very beginning is to find and implement at least 2 lead generation strategies for your business by the end of October, you're far more likely to take action because your brain is now filtering for those actions while you're reading the book. So here's what kind of happens next for me in this process, let's say. Maybe as I'm reading, I find 15 different potential actions in the book to take. So I'm going to write them all down. And I know, just from reading all of these books, that not every potential action is created equal. 20% of them would probably lead to 80% of the change that I'm looking for. Those are the highest leveraged activities, the most important, and the easiest to implement sometimes. So those are the ones that I'm going to take action on. People aren't doing this. They're not taking notes. They're not setting goals. They're not analyzing which ones to take action on. And I have a bunch of strategies in the book on how to take better action. I detail how to build an activity tracker that measures your activity and a whole bunch of stuff like that. But I'll give a different example. I don't think that implementing personal development books is a solo sport. I think it's a team sport. So one of the things that's been most useful for me is I've had 2 different accountability groups running for the last handful of years. And an accountability group is a weekly meeting with some of your best friends, your peers, your most motivated, colleagues or friends or whatever. And you just meet and you talk about taking action on these books for an hour every week. So Terry, let's say we were in a group and I'm like, hey man, I just read this great book on lead generation. My goal was to find and implement at least 2 things. Here are the 2 things that I'm going to implement. Next week, I want you to follow up with me and ask me how it went. So now let's say the week's going on and I don't really take much action and I know I have that meeting with you and you're going to ask me about it. That's like having a gym partner waiting for you at the gym. Like you're going to get out of bed and go because somebody else is relying on you. I know you're going to hit me up about it. I know we're going to talk about it and you're going to give me a really hard time if I don't take action on it because I told you I was going to.
Yeah.
That level of accountability is really useful. So I recommend reaching out to your most motivated friends and saying, hey, there's this new book, Rise of the Reader, coming out. I want to read it. Can I buy you a copy and can we read it together and meet for an hour a week and talk about it? And that will get you into this, like you guys will go in different directions on what you're reading over time. That's fine. Terry, you might be like, hey, I want to run a marathon next year, so I want you to hold me accountable to reading a book about that. Or, like somebody else might be like, hey, I want to, lose 50 pounds. And so you're going to read a book about that. But you guys can hold each other accountable to reading and implementing what you learn. And I think that framework, like reading is not a solo sport, it's a team sport, has totally changed my life. It's encouraged me to take so much better action.
Well said, Nick. Well said. I did wanted your opinion with Amazon because you're releasing a book. There's hundreds of millions of books out there, obviously. What's your take on physical books versus Kindle?
Yeah, I'm a big physical book guy. One differentiation that I'll make between physical books and audiobooks real quick is that 80% of the inputs to our brain are visual. So like by default, if you choose just to listen to something and you're multitasking while driving a car or doing chores or at the gym, by default, you're not going to get as much out of that book. But between a Kindle and a physical book, I think they're very similar in terms of your ability to read and implement. I do run a social media page with books, and so like visually it's more appealing if I have the physical book than just posting a picture of my Kindle. So that's kind of one reason that I do it. But I enjoy the feeling of the paper. Like I enjoy kind of the multi-sensory experience. Books have a smell, you can write in them. There's all sorts of benefits. But one of my mentors, Kevin Horsley, he always laughs at me because he's like, dude, reading a physical paper book is like using a paper map in the car instead of a GPS. Because he's like, dude, a Kindle, you can highlight things in real time. You can
Yeah.
take notes in real time. If you're connected to Wi-Fi, you can look up definitions in real time. You can export your notes. He's like, it's just so much more efficient. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Just
What about
preference.
you? What do you read?
Both, I like using physical books, but we've kind of ran out of space. Probably get a couple more like yours. I would definitely get yours, physical book. Yeah, I don't have
I
space
have a
like
lot
that. I
of
got to
books.
build that. Yeah, and that's amazing. Like, I got Blue Ocean Strategy. Um, I don't know, a few other books, physical ones, but yeah, I use Kindle as well. Works well. Takes notes, gives me snapshots of what I'm highlighting, which helps. I think this benefits to both, in my opinion.
Yeah, if you're using a Kindle, next time you read a book, write your goal on a sticky note and put it on the back of your Kindle. And every time you read a few more pages, like flip that over, look at the sticky note, read your intention, your goal for the book, and then read a few more pages. Because again, your brain will highlight the actions that you can take like naturally. So yeah, it's I love either one. And listen, my bags when I travel, my backpacks are very heavy because I bring a lot of physical books, and I do have a Kindle. I don't I don't use it as much as I probably should. It would be more efficient, that's for sure.
It's all good, man. Preference at the end of the day. But Nick, man, what's next for you, man? We're going into October here, and then November. The rest of the year. Like, what's your future goals? I guess moving forward.
You know what's interesting is like I used to set goals that were very different than my current reality. But more recently, I've had a lot of resistance to doing that, and I think I'll try to articulate this because it's kind of a weird subject. But I don't want anything that's different than what I have today. Like I enjoy the passage of time. That's what I optimize for. I love my life. I love everything about it. I don't want anything to change. Yes, I want more money. Yes, I want to be a little bit healthier. Yes, I don't know if I could be happier. I want better relationships, but like more impact. But it doesn't look like anything different than what I have today. Maybe just more of the same. And one of the, it's a kind of a weird thing to talk about because most people, they want something that's very different than their current reality, and I get it. But I've read and implemented hundreds of books. Like I've defined what makes me happy and what fulfills me. I built a business where I can do that every day. When I look at my calendar, there's nothing that doesn't bring me energy. There's nothing that's neutral or drains energy from me anymore. I've outsourced, automated, or delegated all of it.
Hmm.
So it's like, that is what these books are supposed to do for you. They're supposed to create your dream life. And at some point, that's actually supposed to happen. And so that's happened. And I don't know what the future looks like. Like, I just want to be in the present moment as much as possible and continue doing what lights me up. So I don't know. Like, I'll tell you one thing that we did this year. We just hosted our first event earlier this month for a lot of our authors and for some podcaster partners and stuff like that at BookThinkers. And that was so much fun. It was really hard, and I lost a lot of money doing it because I didn't do it the right way. But I think we'll start to host more events, like BookThinkers events. So that's going to be something that I know we do more of. And listen, we just want to keep connecting the right book at the right time for people. As my book Rise of the Reader comes out, and as people start to read and implement this, I think I'll get into speaking a little bit more at conferences and on podcasts like this because I really enjoy it. I can share ways that people can get more from these books. And I want to make reading cool again. Like when I was growing up, reading was not cool. I was not a big fan of reading. I thought it was lame, but I want to make reading cool again. That's one of my goals.
Well said, man. No, I totally agree. I didn't like book. I didn't like reading at all when I was younger. That fall into my adulthood, and then I'm trying to get back into it. But I feel like Rise of the Reader and you, Nick, will change that. Like I know you will. Um, and on that note, though, what's the best way for people to reach out to you, man? To connect, to get a hold of your book, when the book's coming out? Is there a specific date? All that cool stuff.
Sure. So one of my favorite things to do for people is play this kind of like book matchmaker role. So if anybody in your audience is like, hey, I want to start reading, but I don't know where to start, DM me at BookThinkers on Instagram. That's our biggest community. And tell me about a problem you have. Tell me about a skill you want to develop or something in between. And I'll make a custom book recommendation for you. So that's where people can go. From there, they can check out the links in our bio. They can find whatever they want, our website, links to my book. My book drops November 1st, right around the time this podcast drops. And yeah, grab a copy. It's available on Audible, Kindle, paperback, hardcover, whatever suits you. And listen, like I said, a $20 book in a few hours of your time can change everything if you're intentional about it. And I hope that this book, Rise of the Reader, does that for your audience.
Yeah, man, I think it will, hands down. You hear it first, guys. Rise of the Reader, November 1st. I'll have the link below and the Instagram handle for Book Thinkers to reach out to Nick. And please, like he said, DM him, guys. DM him your problem. This man will give you a custom, a custom book that will help with that specific solution. But yeah, guys, that you heard it here first. So Nick, every interviewer, I like to ask a specific question. I can never remember it. You think I remember it by now? But what keeps you going every day when you want to give up?
I think it's the fact that the right book at the right time changes somebody's life, and it's that I'm connected to a purpose. So it's hard not to stay engaged when people are telling you how much these books change your life. I mean, I'll tell this story is going to take 2 minutes, but I'll tell a story of how much this purpose means to me. So I got married earlier this year, and my
Congrats.
wife and I were on a honeymoon. Yeah, thank you. And we were bouncing around Europe. We went to a bunch of different places and had a lot of fun. And one of the places that we went was Dubrovnik, Croatia. So small country, small city, right? Dubrovnik, I think, only has like 30,000 people in it or something. And outside of Dubrovnik, we were in this tiny little area, right? This community, 1,000 people in it or whatever. And we were walking to a bar to get some drinks one night, and we walked past a really cool restaurant. It was totally full. It was right on the water. It was beautiful. And my wife said to me, hey, on our walk back, let's make a reservation. I said, yeah, sure, whatever. So we stayed out kind of late. We had a few drinks. We were having some fun. And on our walk back, we noticed that this restaurant was closed up. And she's like, bummer. Like, we'll have to try to come back tomorrow and figure this out. And I said, no, like, let me just go inside and see if there's somebody cleaning up, and I'll ask if they can make us a reservation. So I go inside and I find somebody who's cleaning. And I said, hey, can I make a reservation for tomorrow night? And he looks up and he goes, yeah, sure, man. By the way, I'm a huge fan. And I was like, huge fan of what? Like, he definitely thinks I'm somebody else. So I said, a huge fan of what? And he goes, BookThinkers. He's like, dude, your book recommendations have changed my life. And I was like, okay, I want to hear what that means. You know, it gives me goosebumps till this day. And well, it only happened a few months ago. And then he goes into this like 10-minute long story about all of these book recommendations I've made, these podcasts that I've hosted, even just like story posts from years ago that I shared and everything like that. And he just lights up all these book recommendations about how much of an impact they've made. And I'm eating it up, right? Because this is exactly why I do what I do. This is how I get through those hard times that you just asked about. It's because I'm connected to a purpose. It's because people like this random guy in Croatia that I met barging into a restaurant after it was already closed consume my content and use it to improve their lives. And impact feels really good. Now, it's only felt through feedback, right? He had never DM'd the account before. I had no idea who he was. But he passively consumed content, used it to improve his life. And when we bumped into each other randomly on the other side of the world, he told me about it. And that was really cool. So that's why I'm connected to this. And yeah, fun experience for me.
Cool, man. Yeah, I love that story. Very unique and different, that's for sure. But yeah, Nick, I mean, look, man, you're gonna kill it. I think you're gonna explode like crazy scale. Um, yeah, guys, please reach out to Nick. Please read a book. I'm telling you, because I need to step up my game now after hearing Nick. I had no excuses now. But that's my goal, man, to read as many books as I can, and I lack on that. So I appreciate you for coming on with my audience, explaining the process about your new book as well. And yeah, guys, if you have any questions, please reach out to me or Nick at BookThinkers, and you will get help. Customized solutions, guys. Hands given by Nick. Please reach out. But
Appreciate you, man. Thank you.
thank you, Nick. To the next episode, guys. Peace out.